Okay, thank you very much. So just real quick, I want to explain kind of my ambiguous title. There's a recent policy change in the US where the only way I could be here is in my personal capacity, so I'm not allowed to represent my employer. So that being said, thank you, Claire, and your team for having me. I'm humbled and honored to be here speaking with you folks. If you know what school might be in Monterey, California, you probably guess where I work. So that being said, the views expressed in this presentation are mine and mine alone, and do not represent the views of my employer. So let's move on from that. Unfortunately, I have to start on a kind of a solemn note. The research I'm going to present to you today is part of a book that I just wrote with my good friend and mentor, Brandon Valeriano, who we lost about 2 months ago unexpectedly. So I had to give him some credit for this, and I'm going to miss him dearly. He was a great mentor to me, and I wouldn't be here on this stage if not for his mentorship. So unfortunately, I had to bring the news to you. If you guys know who he is, or at least know what he does, you know he's kind of a giant in our field. So we're going to miss him. So I'm going to move on from that. So yeah, exactly. This is going to be a book that's coming out hopefully in July or August. It's in print right now, so I have to wait for the copy edits and then it gets print. I'm going to highlight the chapter on cyber operations. But what we look at in this book is emerging technology, how it's been being used in the war. And whether or not it's changing warfare, if it's producing a revolution in military affairs, or is warfare with this emerging technology more of the same? And I would argue the latter. And I'm going to have time for Q&A on this presentation. But what we see in Ukraine with all this advanced technology and drones and EW and space technology, when you have parity, as we do with these technological capabilities between Russia and Ukraine, we see trench warfare. We see the need to take terrain to win battles. And so we see this stalemate in the eastern and southern parts of Ukraine, where we see the outcomes of these battles much like the war 100 years ago on the Western Front in France. Another thing that I do is I work with mid-career military officers, not only from the U.S., but from many of the countries that are represented here in the room. So midshipmen and cadets I'll probably see in about 8 years. I see you guys in the room. So what I get them to do, they work at the tactical and the operational level. I get them to start thinking more big picture. Is what you're doing, operationally or tactically, what are the strategic implications of that? And so that's what I'm going to be basically presenting to you today with this talk concentrated on chapter 4. So chapter 1, we, if you work in the military circles, you know that we could spend an hour on semantic warfare, on what we define, how we define things like political warfare and hybrid warfare. Real quick, for the purposes of this talk, political warfare is much in the I define in much of the tradition of American statesman George Kennan, where it's mainly irregular and intelligence services that include cyber and information services that operate below the threshold of what we consider armed conflict. Hybrid warfare is what is throwing the proverbial kitchen sink. All instruments of power, blurring the lines of war and peace, and so a lot more actors involved and a lot more instruments of power involved. So based on these definitions, and I spend a lot of time in this chapter on this is how you define political warfare. This is how you define hybrid warfare. This is irregular warfare. This is gray zone warfare. I'm not going to waste your time doing that. But for the purposes of this talk, I would argue that the war in Ukraine has been a hybrid warfare since 2014 and just escalated in 2022. And just a reminder, war and peace, red lines between war and peace, that's a Western invention. The Russians don't think like that. They're at war with us all the time. It's just what level of war with us are they at with us? The Chinese think the same. Their unrestricted warfare concept and a lot of things borrowing from Sun Tzu. Chapter 2, we kind of get into how did we get here? What did we miss? Why couldn't we have deterred Putin? What we find is Putin was very, very, very open about what he wanted to do. And either we didn't listen or didn't believe him. because he was pretty open on his intentions, especially if you guys got a chance to read his nice 2021 manifesto on what he thinks about Ukrainians. If you haven't, it's called On the Historical Unity Between Russians and Ukrainians. You can Google it. It's in English. It's probably in other languages as well. And it really helps you get into kind of Putin's way of thinking and how he views the world. And we should have maybe seen this coming. So chapter 3, we kind of go through how the Ukrainian military reform after 2014, how the Russian military reform after 2008. That was kind of their watershed moment. We need reform after the almost botched invasion of Georgia. What we found is, when you're an authoritarian regime with a Soviet legacy, with a history of corruption and grift, where it's all about pleasing Putin. Though the money put into reforms a lot of times goes into people's pockets. We kind of saw the Russian military fall apart. I'll give one example. They were supposed to have these really nice tires on their convoy on the way to Kiev, and a lot of these trucks broke down because they had cheap knockoff tires that blocked the road and allowed the Ukrainians to attack with surprise strikes and things like that. So in a nutshell, Ukrainians reformed correctly. Russians did not reform very well. And when we see that difference in military capability lead to a very smaller actor go toe-to-toe with a very larger actor. Then we go through things that have to do with the AI environment. How are neural networks, machine learning, how are they helping battlefield decisions on both sides? How about large language models, GPTs? How are those? I basically concentrate a lot on influence operations. How is ChatGPT and those types of programs allowing for more, more precise and more human-sounding chatbots that are deployed on, the social media and things like that, where there's a lot of scale and a lot of quality that's been, I've been noticing in the last 2 years since ChatGPT launched, where people don't realize they're chatting with AI as much as they used to. And then, of course, we get into the drones, and I think a lot of people in this conference have covered drones very well, so I won't get into that. And then space technology and electronic warfare. And basically what we find is the Russians have the legacy of being a superpower, so they have their satellites, they have their EW capabilities, they've been investing in AI, but so have the Ukrainians. And then with Western help and private sector help, Ukraine's been able to kind of balance that power. What we might call in my field, political science, an offense-defense balance, where if there's no domination by either offense or defense, you get stalemate. And that's what we've seen in the war. So chapter 4 will be more in detail. I could go down to Riga after this and give a presentation on chapter 5. And then obviously, especially you Europeans, you know how Russia's been using especially its natural gas capabilities against Europe, and how that's affected geopolitics here on this side of the Atlantic. So summing up, one thing I want you guys to think about is, are all the coercive hybrid strategies that Putin's been using on us for the past 20-some years, are they getting him closer to his strategic goals? So what are his strategic goals? Number one, divide the West, make it weaker. Arguably, maybe that's happening now. The transatlantic alliance maybe is being ruffled a little bit. But in my opinion, I've never seen Europe this united in a long time against a common enemy. I know the Eastern Europeans have different opinions than the Western Europeans. I'll let you guys argue outside over there about that. But in that sense, he's failed in dividing Europe. What else? Making Russia great again, making Russia be perceived as a great power. His military operations have been an embarrassment, and Russia has not been very impressive on the battlefield. I think they went over the 1 million casualty mark in terms of the war, with over 200,000 dead. That's a lot of people in just a short period of time. What else? Expansion of NATO. With Finland joining, that he doubled the size of NATO's borders on Russia, so he failed there as well. So I would argue that Putin is farther from his strategic goals than he's ever been with his coercive strategy. We can debate that. I'm leaving time for questions, but that's what I basically find in the book. More details. Hopefully it comes out soon, and you guys can pre-order. And I'm not going to try to sell you a book anymore. So let's move on. So one thing that got me started on this was, if you guys remember, or maybe you don't. Well, yeah, you probably remember because we're all cyber people here. A lot of the armchair generals and punditry out of the press and the think tanks and things like that thought that because Russia's so capable in the cyber environment, and they've been doing all these things to Ukraine from 2014 to 2020, that we're going to see the cyber Pearl Harbor, the big cyber, the shock and awe, as somebody put it. Others called it maybe a cyber thunder run. So cyber operations would paralyze Ukraine's defense through coordinated attacks that would basically knock out all the lights, knock out all the comms, leave Ukraine in the dark, cause a civil unrest, and the Russians can move in and take over in a short period of time. But we didn't see that. We saw limited cyber operations. We saw cyber operations go up, but we didn't see this kind of this big cyber that was predicted by a lot of punditry. And I'm not going to name names because that's not polite, but outlets such as the Washington Post, Foreign Affairs, and think tanks like RAND were saying these things. So I'll let you guys Google that and see who said what. So what did we find? Cyber operations, I argue, have not significantly altered the war. They're an additive force, but they have not revolutionized warfare in the way that these pundits might have said. So we see limited evidence of cyber attacks severely degrading Ukraine's capabilities to kind of not give away the ending. We're seeing the Russians take Iranian-made drones and precision or non-precision guided missiles to hit civilian infrastructure rather than hacking it. So when you're at full-scale war, why hack it when you can blow it up? We're seeing more of that. Another thing that we thought we might see, because Russia's a very sophisticated cyber power, is more coordination between military units and cyber units and having additive effects in terms of battlefield victories. We see very, very little coordination there, where cyber people were doing their own thing, not coordinating with the conventional people who were in the same area. This might have to do, our militaries are still having trouble integrating cyber operations into military planning. But if you guys saw the coup from Prigozhin on how he went against Gerasimov and Shoigu because he wasn't getting what he needed, that's kind of how the Russian state works. It's all about pleasing the boss, and you go at each other to try to get in his favor. It didn't work out for Prigozhin. It worked out for Gerasimov and Shoigu. So intelligence agencies are mainly in charge of the cyber operations, and you have the conventional military. They don't necessarily cooperate. They compete with each other. So that's why we might see little coordination between conventional units and cyber folks. And yeah, I probably need to get some of this. Uh-oh. There we go. Okay, so I don't know if you guys, I've been doing this for about, 15, 16 years. These are two of my previous books where we use quantitative data to try to find patterns and give strategic analysis on what's going on in the cyber domain in the realm of a political science perspective. So what we find, it's good for political warfare. It's good for intelligence. It's good for irregular forces. It's good for that below the threshold of armed conflict that we've seen for the past 20 years from Russia and China. They use it a lot for espionage, for disruptions, for influence operations, for signaling objectives. Amongst the major powers especially, we see little to no critical infrastructure attacks that actually knock out the lights, that actually open the floodgates of a dam. A lot of that has to do with signaling, showing your capabilities, but not going as far where that might trigger casualties or death. We find that they're more of an additive form in conflict. They're not war winners, they're not battle winners, but they can assist in that. And this is an international relations term in rivalry, what's called normal relations range. States that don't like each other will do things to each other during peacetime. In the US now we're calling it competition, strategic competition, great power competition. The Russians call it warfare, just not escalated warfare. So cyber operations are part of that toolkit where when you don't like another state, hacking them is something that you do. The books that are studied here, we didn't have a full-scale war in Ukraine, so we look at these kind of limited actions that Russia has done in Georgia in 2008, in the Crimea seizure in 2014, and then the initial invasion in the Donbass in 2014 as well. So for this chapter, what we want to do, we want to see the dynamics of cyber operations in the first phase of Russia's war, that's 2014 to 2021-ish, and then the shaping phases to the invasion phases of the escalated war, full-scale war that started in late 2021 all the way up to the February 24th invasion. So we kind of delineate the time periods there. Our data is, I've been collecting and maintaining data on cyber operations since 2008. Right now we have incidents up to 2020. I have the raw data for a more updated data set. I just need to find the time to do it. So hopefully I can get that updated for you soon. But for the full-scale version, there's folks in the room from both of these entities that produce good reports where we can get good data on cyber operations for this full-scale invasions. Microsoft, and I'm not going to say the whole thing, but you see the acronym there. There's representatives from that entity in Ukraine. They've been putting out good reports on cyber operations that we've seen. So what we find in a nutshell is we see, obviously with warfare, you're going to see a lot more action. You're going to see a lot more incidents, not only in the cyber domain, but other parts of military operations. So we saw a rise in cyber operations, but we saw the severity of cyber operations go down and the strategic impact of these cyber operations remaining low because we see more of a shift to low-level disruptions and espionage activities and a kind of decline in degradation or critical infrastructure attacks because those are being replaced with conventional attacks. So the question is, what's cyber's utility in a full-scale war? Does it actually kind of take a back seat where it's maybe more useful in a political warfare or a gray zone warfare or a competition scenario and not, after the full-scale invasion, maybe it does. Maybe the utility of cyber operations might go down a little bit in terms of being a blunt instrument of power. So we argue it means a good tool for shaping, for creating chaos, for causing confusion before military action happens, but not necessarily something that will lead to a victory on the battlefield. I had fun with PowerPoint when I was making these slides, so so as a guy who's immersed in military situations, what we would expect from the start of a military operation is cyber would be used to shape the environment pre-conflict. Russia's been doing that. So things like, we saw it in Georgia, website defacements and denial of service attacks. Saw the same thing in Crimea as well as the Donbass. So, and there's a joke we always have about Russia's invasions. They always happen around Olympics. There's like a correlation there. If you guys think back and when Russia's invaded places, they usually happen right after Olympics for some reason. So keep an eye on the next Olympics and see what he might do. How about cyber-enabled information operations to create, to pepper the information space with confusion and deter the potential invasion of, deter counter moves from the possibly invaded to get them to not make optimal decisions in terms of countering the moves of the possible invasion. And so number 3 would be support battlefield victories and seize the initiatives. If you're a military person, especially if you're a US military person, I just listed phase 0 to phase 2 in military operations. This is where I think that we see the most action from any kind of instrument of power. So that's why we concentrate on the first 3 phases of warfare, because this is where we might see the most cyber action when it comes to a military invasion. So therefore, here come our hypotheses. These hypotheses are based on the predictions of the punditry that we saw from those outlets that I named. So based on what Russia's been doing, we see an increase in rate and severity over the course of the shaping and invasion phases of the war compared to the 2014 to 2020 periods. Why? Because that's what they do. They become more frequent and severe during the shaping and invasion phases compared to pre-war levels. That just logically makes sense. They've been doing that since 2014. Things like NotPetya, Bad Rabbit, the sandworm attacks on their critical infrastructure during Christmas. So they have been willing to throw the proverbial book at Ukraine in that pre-war period. I don't want to say pre-war, but gray zone phase of that war. Number two, they've been doing it forever, so we'd see a rise in those kind of low-level DDoS website defacements and espionage to alter the risk calculations of the enemy prior to and during the conflict, just kind of mess with the information space with cyber operations to create confusion, because they've been doing this. Operation Armageddon is their years-long campaign of political warfare on Ukraine, messing with their elections, the black energy attacks, all the things that I've named earlier, as well as the frequent espionage activities we've seen from Russia. Number three, military targets. This makes sense. You're at a full-scale war. You want to take out military targets. Are you going to do that with cyber? That's what we predict. So because their military target's going to be more the more desired target, that's what we're going to hope to see. So military become primary cyber targets during the war. So things like degrading the military command and control of Ukraine, hacking it, knocking out the ability to communicate with forces around Ukraine, and Russia's famed military deception. We call it MILDEC in the U.S., but they call it maskirovka, where it basically means camouflage. Where an example would be when the U.S. and UK intelligence outed that possible false flag that's going to happen in the Donbass before the full-scale invasion, where they were going to set up separatist Russian-speaking Ukrainians and blame it on the Ukrainian regulars, and that would be Russia's pretext for moving into the Donbass in the full-scale invasion. So we'd expect things like that. And then, because it's a war, and because cyber is an additive force in warfare, you want to use cyber operations in tandem with military operations to increase battlefield success. Greater coordination that would create better battlefield success. Force multiplier, we call it. And then finally, active measures, cyber-enabled information operations to support the war for Russian audience and demoralize Ukrainian audiences. And I want to take a pause here on what I mean by cyber-enabled information operations. They're information operations that had to have had a hack or a manipulation of code that information is used for influence purposes, not things like social media chatbots, even though it's on the digital domain. Those are what we might call more traditional I/O. I know it's in the digital domain, but I don't want to cause confusion. Big reason for that is because the next chapter is about that. So cyber-enabled influence operations, there had to have been some sort of manipulation of code or compromise on a system where then that information is used for effect. Yeah, so tradition of active measures and propaganda. Oh, I'm sorry, you guys don't want to take pictures. I keep forgetting about that. There you go. Okay, so a lot of military folks in the room. This is a U.S. example of the phases of a military operation. And like I said, I'm interested in, okay, it does work, kind of. Well, I'll just point. Phase 0 is shape. You want to shape the field in terms of the information and getting the adversary to kind of think on its toes. What's going to happen? I don't know. Many of that you can think of if you guys remember. January and February of 2022, there were Russian troops on the border. U.S. intelligence and NATO intelligence was saying, "Hey, Zelensky, we think they're going to invade." Zelensky was like, "I don't know." The Russians were gaslighting us all over social media, calling us paranoid and silly about the full-scale invasion. That's what I mean by shaping phase, causing this kind of confusion. Phase 2 is deter. Get the enemy to get the adversary to not make optimal decisions based on the kind of things that you're doing in preparation for the invasion. So getting, causing confusion, maskirovka, you'd see kind of things like that in the phase 1 part. And then phase 2 is invasion, seize the initiative. You've shaped the environment, you've deterred the adversary from doing something that might stymie your invasion, and now you're ready. So you seize the initiative, and that's February 24th and the months following. And then I'd argue that phase 3 is dominate, and then phase 4 is stabilize, and then phase 5 is you're occupying. I would argue we're kind of stuck in the phase 2, phase 3. It's been kind of stuck there for the past 3 years. So in terms of getting to the next phases, I don't know if we're going to get there. It doesn't look like a ceasefire is going to happen anytime soon. So that's what I'd say we're at. We're in that orange-pink phase of the war that's been going on for 3 years now, and we've seen a lot of human suffering as a result. So pre-invasion source is my own data. On my website, which is just myname.com, you can see how I code everything, and the data set itself is on there if you want to take a look. It's based on the correlates of war data sets out of the University of Michigan. It's a big compilation of data sets in the political science tradition. I kind of replicated those coding processes for cyber incidents. So for the gray zone phase of the war, 31 cyber incidents we record based on the methodology that I use. I know a lot of you guys are probably saying 31's not very much. This is the way that social scientists will skin this cat. We have specific coding procedures to kind of make collecting data a little more simple so we can make sense of things. So I'm happy to talk after this talk on how I do these things, because it's what I do all the time. And then the invasion phases, the phase 0 to phase 2 period, the shape, deter, seize initiative. We use data from SSCIP and Microsoft that came out in the months of this seize initiative phase of war. I have data on post-August 2022. It's still in its raw form. I expect to see a lot of the same, but I don't know. I'm interested in see what that has to give me. 54 cyber incidents in this period, so a lot more in a shorter period of time. Okay, so it's coded by disruption. These are things like website defacements, DDoS attacks, things that kind of are irritants, but don't necessarily cause permanent damage. They just kind of lock you out of your data for a little bit, and you're annoyed by that. 2 types of espionage we code. Short-term espionage is things that, like hack and leak type operations. You steal information, and then you use that information for some sort of strategic effect that degrades your adversary. Example, my country, 2016, you steal information from the Democratic Party, you give it to Julian Assange in Wikipedia. He releases it on strategic days during the election cycle to make Hillary look bad. So usually an information operation is kind of tied to a short-term espionage. Long-term espionage is more about intellectual property and assets, things that the Chinese have done to us for 20 years, stealing our military technology and things like that. And then things that degrade are denying you a capability that you already had. So this is critical infrastructure usually. You knock out your ability to have lights, you wipe data, you manipulate data, you deny the adversary a capability that they otherwise had before, and that's gone for a significant period of time. And then we kind of delineate the targets, civilian targets, government, non-military, or military targets, code those. What did the cyber attack target? We have a severity scale from 1 to 10. Again, see the website, you can see the different types of severity. We wanted to compare the severity levels of the gray zone period and the full scale period and see if there's any differences. We didn't code any events over the severity level 6. I'll have the descriptions of these severity levels here in a second, so bear with me. And then we're going to count cyber-enabled information operations, see if there's any differences there. And we're going to see if there's a presence of any kind of coordination with conventional military forces and cyber forces to see if there's any differences there. What we do is we only concentrate on things that we could attribute to the state or the proxies, like Fancy Bear or Cozy Bear, things like that. The things that have been happening, like the IT Army of Ukraine and Killnet from Russia and Anonymous and No Name, we leave out of this analysis, but there obviously was a rise in the presence of those entities, which is pretty interesting as well, which is the topic of another talk that we've heard that I'm not going to spend too much time on. So that being said, we only could verify 54 as state linked. It's really hard to attribute to the state, so we have a kind of a high bar for that. All the others are things that happen from non-state actors, like the entities I just described. Okay, pie graphs. So this is the gray zone. These are the different types of severity levels. If you want to take the picture now, because I'm going to cover it up with the next pie graph. But what you see here is severity level 1 is probing, packet sniffing, low-level stuff. Severity level 2 is harassment, propaganda, denial, and disruptions, things like DDoS attacks and website defacements. Stealing targeted critical information from one network. A lot of that can involve the short-term espionage I was describing. Widespread government, economic, critical private sector network, critical infrastructure, things like that. And then really kind of knocking out a capability of a state. So things like the power grid hack and NotPetya and things like that, where you're denying capabilities. So these are severity levels that we see during the gray zone period from 2014 to 2020. And then what do we see post? The same colors represent the same severity levels, but we see the top 2 severity levels go significantly down, and the lower level things go significantly up. And we attribute that to the fact that instead of hacking these juicy targets, they're just doing it with conventional capabilities instead of cyber attacks. So I don't know how many people have taken statistics and probability, but I'll just explain this real quick. This is just a simple t-test comparing the attributes of the pre-invasion versus the post-invasion severity levels. You see the mean severity of the pre-invasion is about 3.10, post-invasion is 2.5. A t-score is 2.26. That means it's statistically significant, meaning there is a significant difference between these severity levels, and that's a find that we have pretty good evidence that we can reject that first hypothesis that actually, no, severity level does not go up after the full-scale war. It actually goes down. So that was an interesting find. Here is the strategic objectives. So degradations, disruptions, short-term espionage, long-term espionage, pretty even across the 3 of them, and then long-term espionage, about 16%. Take the picture now if you have to. And then post, look at what we see here. Disruptions, 26% there. Goes up to 56% where we see degradations stay roughly the same, but espionage drops off pretty significantly. So that's an interesting find too, in that more low-level disruptions kind of dominate the cyber environment in the post than they did in the pre. All right, finally targets, military targets. Did it go up? So this is gray zone time. Private civilian, they hit the private civilian sectors pretty hard. Government non-military, and then government military. And this is phase 0 to 2, almost the same. So we don't see military targets go up. They keep hitting civilian targets. And based on what I've learned here in the past couple of days, the significance of private actors in this cyber war are telling. That Russia's more worried about that and is going probably after these actors more than they are going after military targets. And then the other attribution is possibly they're going after military targets with conventional weapons over cyber weapons. Okay, so you guys probably have heard the disinformation that we in the US have bioweapons labs in Ukraine, and Russia's used that as an excuse of why they invaded, because they have to protect Russia from the big bad Americans who are making chemical weapons on our borders. This is what we see more of, lots and lots of information operations. Also, 6 of the 54 cyber operations we could tangibly link to a coordinated military campaign. And this was an army of grad students making decisions on this that we'd all kind of get in the same room and decide. So it was a subjective, objective process in getting this to this statistic. We don't see an increased percentage in cyber-enabled information operations, the hack and leak type operations. What we do see is just influence operations on social media, Telegram especially, just skyrocket. The use of ChatGPT enhanced chatbots on social media has just run rampant. And that's the subject of the next chapter that I'm not presenting today. All right, I apologize to any of the vendors here. I don't have you on my slides, but I only have one, but I'm sure a lot of these guys were involved in helping defend Ukraine. And we thank you for that, because Ukraine's really done a good job in keeping out the bad cyber attacks and staying online. So, like other parts of the Russia's war in Ukraine, we overestimated Russia's capabilities, and we underestimated the Ukrainians. Underestimate the Ukrainians at your own risk, because they're really keeping in the fight and doing it very, very innovatively. Infrastructure, critical infrastructure, short-term impacts. Yes, they denied capabilities, but Ukraine's been able to get back up and running as a result of cyber. So that's why we maybe see permanent destruction in terms of precision-guided missiles and Iranian-made drones going after civilian infrastructure now. So NATO countries, U.S. Cyber Command, and its hunt forward programs with allied and partner countries in terms of giving Ukrainians capabilities that they asked for, but letting Ukrainians take the lead on these things. The Canadians have been big in this as well. So the hunt forward has been very helpful for the Ukrainians, aided by Cyber Command. And Ukraine has been prepared. They were preparing for 8 years. Work with NATO, private firms, Microsoft, Google, the other ones up here, I'm sure. And so this defensive readiness reduced Russian cyber effectiveness. So that brings me back to that offense-defense balance type concept. When you have balance between defensive capabilities and offensive capabilities, no one's able to dominate. Going back to that phases of war chart, the domination has not happened on either side. We're kind of just stuck there. And so this is not only with cyber, but also in other domains. One thing that IT Army of Ukraine's been able to do is get citizens, just anybody who doesn't like what Russia's doing, to get involved in cyber operations. Instead of, creating botnets that you can control and go after certain networks, they're crowdsourcing denial of service attacks. So not hacking, but saying, hey, everybody, at 2 p.m. Russian time, let's go after Gazprom. And that knocks out Gazprom's website for, however long people are trying to log on to that network. So, citizen or individuals are getting involved in the fight here, as well as, the non-state actors from multinational corporations to hacktivist groups. So the implications, we think they're more about shaping environments and intelligence gathering. They're better for phase 0, phase 1, not so much phase 2, invasion phase. Did not replace and had limited coordination with conventional forces in Ukraine. Again, that could just, the United States is having trouble with that, and we're supposed to have the most sophisticated cyber capabilities. I'm talking about coordinating cyber operations with military operations. It's still been relatively difficult. Russia's having the same problem, and it doesn't help that the cyber units are competing with the conventional units for money and Putin's approval. So instead of working together, they're competing with each other. So with this limited impact of cyber operations as decisive weapons, what can we take from this, right? So let's review. Cyber severity decreased during wartime. We saw more critical infrastructure attacks be hit by kinetic strikes. We saw disruptions increase significantly. Espionage went down a little bit. Degradation stayed a little bit about the same, but went down a little bit as well. But disruption activities went way up. The civilian targets, the amount of civilian targets stayed relatively the same. Military targeting didn't go up, contrary to expectations. We saw minimal coordination between cyber and kinetic operations. Cyber-enabled I/O was still happening, but it didn't increase significantly. But we did see a big spike in what we consider non-cyber-enabled I/O, like social media campaigns and things like that. And I know that our president in the U.S. really wants a ceasefire. Putin doesn't look like he's going to agree to that. But if that does happen, if we go back to a ceasefire in a gray zone situation, maybe we'll see more severe cyber attacks. That would be my prediction if I'm right about what I've just shown you. But I might not be right. So I'm going to give you were there specific conditions to this? If you guys remember, Putin didn't even tell his generals, he didn't tell anybody except his inner circle that what he's going to do up until like February 23rd, 24th. He kept everybody in the dark. Most of the military thought they were going for a training exercise, didn't even know they were in Ukraine. So how could that give military planners and cyber operators the ability to even plan for coordination? Because Russia's an authoritarian country and people are afraid of Putin, they tell him what he wants to hear rather than what he needs to hear. So he gets the information that he wants to hear. Hey, you're going to take Kyiv in 3 days. The Ukrainians in the east are going to welcome you with open arms, and you're going to have what you want within the week. And you're a great leader, Mr. Putin. So that being said, did he want the Ukrainian infrastructure intact? Did he not want to knock it out because he was going to have Kyiv in 3 days and he needed it? Also, not only here in the West, not only in Russia, but here in the West, we underestimated Ukrainians' capabilities. They did a really good job on defense, and a lot of it had to do with their own initiative, but also help from private sector and allied countries. Like I said, this is kind of a segue to the next chapter, but I'm not going to present that to you today, but I do a nice deep dive on the influence operations in this book as well. So that being said, can we generalize these dynamics, or is this a Russia-Ukraine specific thing? And so in the spirit of the theme of this conference, what's the next step? Would this be the same? Will we see the same kind of things, and God forbid, between a NATO and Russia operation? Is there anybody here from Taiwan? No? Okay. There's a big interest in the U.S. on what can we learn from the Russia-Ukraine scenario, and how can we apply that to the China-Taiwan scenario? Would it be the same things or different? Ukraine was a land invasion. Taiwan would be an amphibious assault. But at the same time, it's bigger country against smaller country, where smaller country has to fight smarter. And then another God forbid scenario, how would cyber work in a China-US conflict? Because the US has so many digital assets, perhaps China would come after the US with cyber operations before any kind of military conflict came out. So with that, I don't know how much time I have left. I guess it's 17 minutes. I will pause for questions, but that's what I had to show you today, and I hope I made sense. So thanks for your attention. So, anybody have any questions, comments? Yes, sir.
Hi, Ryan. Good morning. This is Nicholas from Microsoft. I was curious whether you could elaborate a little bit on how and whether cyber activities in neighboring countries or supporting countries shaped your perception, because I think a lot of the activity that you see that has sort of disappeared or shifted when the full-scale invasion happened, shifted to Poland and other countries. How did that come into play in your analysis?
Yeah, that's called horizontal escalation. So instead of hitting Ukraine with cyber operations, we're gonna mess with their allies. So yeah, I think it was Lithuania and Poland, or maybe Latvia and Poland, right there at the beginning. And then I know that Killnet and No Name, who are supposedly non-state groups, but they probably coordinate with the Kremlin. We're going after Western government and NATO sites as well. So for the purposes of this, we were more concentrated in the military aspects of this, but the whole wider political warfare, yeah, we do cover that in the beginning chapters and present the fact that yes, to kind of discourage Western help we're gonna mess with them in either the cyber or information environments. And so yes, there was presence of that. But I know that Poland example, and it was another country. I think it was one of the Baltics. I don't know if it was Latvia, Lithuania, where those important networks in those countries were hacked during the invasion. Yeah. So yeah, I have taken that into account. Hope that answered your question. Yeah. Yes, sir. Oh yeah, he's over here in the corner.
First of all, thank you for your presentation, sir. But talking about the conclusions that you made, have you maybe some additional research or question, or maybe it will be your future research, maybe the conclusions that you made about the Russian degradation, about the cyber attacks in Ukraine, they are not about the degradation itself, but because of the data sources that you're working with, they are not showing the whole pictures that what's happening in Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the question is, did I scour enough sources to get a good picture? That's always a problem in social science research. But I've been doing the collection of my data that I've been doing, and it's been peer reviewed for years. I use the same coding procedures for that. And so yes, could there be missing data? Absolutely. But I think that we found enough evidence. So I analogize this to the iceberg theory. There's only so much in cyber that you can see, and then all below the sea you don't. I'd argue that the way I collect data, you tip the iceberg over here, and there's at least enough that you might not see. Even though you don't see everything, you get a picture of things that might have been happening covert. One thing that happens in the cyber domain is things always eventually get out. It might take months, might take years, but eventually it might all get out. One thing that I do have a caveat on in terms of the invasion phase of the war is that not everything has been attributed in that period yet, because it sometimes can take a while. So yes, I do have reservations on whether or not I'm absolutely correct. And that being said, my employer has funded me to take what I've learned here and apply it to a China-Taiwan scenario. So I'm going to kind of game that out and see if there's similarities and differences there. But yes, as a social science researcher, you always have to be humble and know that maybe you're not getting everything you need. But I think I've got enough to make at least somewhat accurate predictions. But we could always be wrong. So we shall see. But yeah, thank you. Oh, yeah, I'm in charge, I guess. Sorry, yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for the great presentation. With all the benefits of your position, seeing the big picture and having all the data available, what would be your advice to Ukrainian policymakers on shaping cyber strategy and putting effort in different places, prioritizing tasks to government services and maybe outsourcing something to crowdsource group?
Sure. I mean, my advice would be make sure the Russians don't get in. Keep your information secure.
Easy to say.
Yeah, I know. So you have your help from your private sector partners, and as well as your allies and partners. And I think for the most part, they've been doing a good job in keeping the internet open. And even when Russia's actually gone after your communications on the ground, like literally cutting the lines from the occupation zones. People like, Elon Musk, but Starlink has been able to keep some of these places online because of satellite technology. So, the help of the global community has really, really, really given Ukraine not necessarily the edge, but given it the ability to defend itself and keep on par with the Russians. That's 3 times your size. And has a lot more capabilities, and it's just incredible how you kept in this fight. And not to get gushy here, but I'm very, very proud to be in the same room with Ukrainians here. I don't know if I answered your question, but keep diligent, keep resilient, keep your defenses up. And yeah, there's always a chance that the Russians can get in, but I think you've been doing a pretty good job of keeping them out for the most part. I think somebody. Yes, sir. Oh, I know. I think you were first. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. And then you, yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. And I actually ask a question about China, so CCP methodology or PLM methodology. So you are focusing on the Russian method, but so I'm Japanese.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm very, I know about the Chinese method or Chinese ways
Yeah.
in the, for example, you said Taiwan issues or, so for example, some Okinawa issues. So how do you think about so Chinese TTP or some kind of methodology in the first stage of the
So
first
yeah,
step of
so
the,
what I've noticed is since about COVID, China was very, very known for not necessarily doing influence operations on the West, but stealing our intellectual property, our tangible property, Japan being one of them, and then copying that to make their own Chinese Silicon Valley. Since COVID, we've seen them kind of shift in their cyber activity to be more like Russia's, more influence operations, more trying to counter narratives, like things like, so an example that I gave you there is the bioweapons lab narrative. China took that narrative and amplified it in their media circles because they took that saying, look what the bad United States is doing in Ukraine. We have evidence that, because they can lie at whenever they want, that's therefore evidence that the U.S. Army, they specifically said the U.S. Army planted COVID in Wuhan to blame it on China. And so many Chinese think that that's true. So I've seen China shift to a more influence operation cyber strategy since, recently.
They traditionally use so intelligence methodology such like human intelligence or such kind of using old media or traditional media to use to influence to the Japan or Asia. So, but some kind of collaboration with PLA or some kind of collaborate methodology. Do you think about that? How do you think about that?
How do I think about what? I'm sorry.
Collaboration with PLA. So with
oh, you mean the Russians?
No. Inside of China, so they traditionally use that intelligence methodology. But in recent, I think so they try to collaborate with so intelligence committee try to use military forces. So I'd like to know about how do they do that in the Taiwan issue or in the next steps of the Asian situations?
Sure. Well, yeah, that's one thing that the Taiwanese are definitely looking at. They're looking at a lot of what can we learn about Ukraine and learn about China. One thing that I think is interesting about China, and I'm going to admit you right now, I am not a China expert, so this is just what I think without being an expert. I have colleagues that are China experts. If they were here, I'd ask them. What I find interesting is that a few years ago, the Chinese consolidated their cyber information and EW forces into what's called this strategic support force. And then 2 years later, they broke it up. And now it's the information support force, then the cyberspace force. So what happened there? Usually China doesn't like to admit that it's wrong. And so something wasn't working there. And like I said, I don't know enough about Chinese inner workings on why that happened. But that's just an interesting thing. And so I know Taiwan's wondering the same thing. But I don't know if you are, as a Japanese person, what they're doing in terms of the information environment there, just to try to mess with you guys. I don't know if I've answered your question or not, but it's interesting that China has consolidated and then deconsolidated when it comes to this domain. And if there's any Chinese experts in the room, please elaborate, because I don't think I can have enough expertise to elaborate on any further. Yeah, yes, sir.
Hey, thank you for the presentation. I'm Murthy Ralapalli from University of North Georgia in Atlanta. My question is, there are many allies for Ukraine and they help them, including the private sector.
Yeah.
Now, as far as Russia is concerned, I'm sure they also have allies. I'm wondering how they got help from their allies and how did they amplify their capabilities.
Sure. Yeah, and that's a great segue in that one of my next projects, hopefully in the next fiscal year, is what I call, you always have to have a catchy term, like Fancy Bear Cage. Call it the silent pack. What we're seeing since the invasion of Ukraine is what we're calling strategic convergence, where you see cooperation amongst the four authoritarians, the China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. you see them kind of piggyback on each other's narratives to kind of amplify them, the bioweapons labs being another one. The other narrative that China jumps on is the NATO expansion to paint the US as an imperial expansionist power. Then you see what's happening with North Korea. They're sending troops to Ukraine. What are they getting in return? I'm guessing it's military technology that's going to be able to translate into scaring the Japanese and the South Koreans. And then Iran and North Korea are cooperating with missile technology. And then China has, to a certain point, helped Russia with its loss of revenue from energy from Europe. So Europe was Russia's cash cow, especially Germany and others that don't have their own resources. China and India, as well as others, they haven't replaced the European revenue, but they've been helping Russia make up for that lost revenue that's happened with sanctions and the cutoff of natural gas supplies and oil supplies to Europe. So that's one thing that I know my employer is worried about is this increased cooperation amongst the four adversaries. So yeah, that's a problem that I'm going to dive into soon. Maybe I can come back in a year and tell you what I found. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. And is this clock accurate? Is this when I end? Okay, just making sure. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And I'm currently at the CCDOC Center Law Branch. I was wondering, latest 2 days ago, we saw that most of the systems used also for defense by Ukraine and so on, by default, civilian and public infrastructure as well. So how did you distinguish when you're looking at civilian military targets, which is it actually? Because in the current conflict, I think they're very mixed, and this dual use is just going to become default in a lot of future events.
Yeah, I mean that's why we get in a room of graduate students and professors, and it's not a sometimes there's not consensus. So it's literally a democratic process of subjective objectivity. Was the military asset more important than the civilian asset when we code this incident? So that's how we did it. It's not perfect, but neither is social science research. It's not like physics. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry. How do you expect it to evolve? Because you were looking at, okay, how much is it before in the gray phase, and then in the thing you said, oh, there's not so much difference between how much they attacked civilians and military targets. But now if you consider that this dual use is just becoming the default in future conflicts and cyber oppression, do you expect any involvement in that repetition of the cyber attack targets?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's the question is, what's more important to wherever they're attacking, and to your point about dual use is like, how do I code that? Yeah, that's something I'm gonna have to think about. I don't really have an answer. I get back to the drawing board with my colleagues, and we'll have to hash this all out. But yeah, in general, we're generalizing here is the use of conventional attacks on civilians and especially the energy sector is not being hacked. It's being blown up, which doesn't mean that it's not happening. It just means it's happening less, if that makes sense. But we see these kind of more informational type cyber operations dominate. The more low level stuff's more important in full scale war. So the question is cyber the premier tool in a gray zone competition type scenario that we usually have with China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, and then you go into the full-scale war where you don't need to be covert, you don't need to have plausible deniability, you don't need it to take a while to attribute because we know everybody knows who's fighting who. So are those factors the reasons why kind of cyber takes a backseat in terms of the critical infrastructure attacks? Because you don't want to waste that capability when you're at war because you can, it's just cheaper and easier to blow it up. You save that capability for hitting the US or hitting the UK instead. Because, cyber operations, especially critical infrastructure, it takes a lot of research and development. And and it's a use and lose capability. So this is like a game theory scenario. Like, how long should I sit on this capability before it might be outed? So when's the best time to use it? Because I don't want to use it on Ukraine because that'd be a waste. But maybe there's a situation where the United States makes me mad and I'll use it then. But then you have to think about when that capability might be outed by Microsoft. And so, we can get into this forever. But yeah, it's all about, that's what I do. I think about strategy. Why this and why not? And then you have to make inferences. And so that's what we're trying to figure out. And then applying it to other types of scenarios that might happen. Hopefully they don't, like a China-Taiwan situation or an escalation here in Europe, God forbid. And then an escalation with my country and China. These are all things that we're thinking about, especially in military circles. Are we? One more? Okay. All right. Yeah, you. Sorry. Oh. Waiting on the mic? Okay. You can yell. Oh, no. Oh, sorry. He raised his hand.
Michael from War Studies Department in King College London. So if I understood you correctly, you have two underlying assumptions in your work. One is that espionage doesn't have strategic value.
Oh, it does. Yeah.
At least as I understood it. And the second one is that cyber effects are point effects. So you get a strategic effect from them in a certain point in time. On the other side, we heard yesterday Emily Goldman's keynote talking about persistent initiative and
persistent engagement, yeah.
And cumulative effects. And the question is, did you try to use your data to look into strategic effects of espionage, strategic utility of cyber espionage, and into cumulative effects?
Yeah. I mean, in other research, espionage is espionage. What I find in my data is the most utilized cyber operation for either informational purposes in terms of influence operations or the stealing of intellectual property. So the strategic effects of cyber espionage are monumental. And I don't know if I came off like they weren't. I just saw that there's a reduction in that after the full-scale war. It didn't pull away from the strategic importance. Persistent engagement is this idea that it's a cyber command concept. The big DoD calls it defend forward, which is another word for the O word, but you can't say it. It's kind of like deterrence. You go into the systems, you don't do anything, but you kind of see what they're up to. And if you see something that's going to happen, then yeah, you jump on it. A lot of what goes on there is classified, so I can't really tell you exactly what happens, but that's been the U.S. cyber strategy since about 2020. And the use in that is to prevent things like espionage and even maybe a critical infrastructure attack. So the strategic effects of espionage, I would say, are the most important. I'm sorry if I came off like they weren't. I don't know if that answered. Okay, we could talk more at the dinner time and all that good stuff too. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank you very much.